The Fulton County case against former President Donald Trump will be live streamed on YouTube. Thursday, the Fulton County Superior Court judge overseeing the case said the court will operate the stream. There will also be pool coverage for television, radio, and photography. Georgia allows cameras during criminal proceedings as long as they are not a disruption.
Yesterday, the former president entered a plea of not guilty in Georgia through a court filing. He is also asking the judge to sever his case from his co-defendants. According to his lawyer, Trump will not have sufficient time to prepare his case for trial by October 23, 2023. Enforcing that trial date would, quote, violate federal and state constitutional rights to a fair trial and due process of the law. Former Trump campaign lawyer Sidney Powell and pro-Trump lawyer Kenneth Chesebro also want their trials severed from their co-defendants. Wednesday, they filed motions requesting the separation. So I think, Amber, this is, I don't know, it makes sense to me. I get that it's a RICO charge, right? I get that when it's racketeering, you have co-defendants. But I think it does make sense when you consider the fact that, okay, cameras will be in there. They can cause disruptions. Obviously, Trump is a high-level figure. Does it make sense for his co-defendants to be tried within the same case? I'm not sure, because we could reach a scenario where it's like, okay, Donald Trump was asking people to find votes to bolster his chances of winning the election, to potentially overturn the election. And there could be folks who are just the receiver of those text messages who are found not guilty. I think the RICO charge and charging them all within the same case really complicates this when it comes to actually not just getting the initial indictment, but actually when it comes to sentencing and having a jury decide on the verdict of the case.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the DA here got a little bit over her skis, and there's some strategery, I guess you could say, happening on the defense side. I think what's happening is that Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro, they're invoking their right to a speedy trial, and they're trying to get this out of the way as quickly as possible, perhaps because they feel the case is not very strong against them. So if they can get this over with, maybe try to dampen the ability for these prosecutors to take their time, perhaps gathering more evidence, then they can also have a playbook prepared for the former president, because he'll have more time to prepare and he'll be able to watch these proceedings against his former co-defendants. He'll be able to see what the state brings up, the arguments that they're trying to make, and prepare for them in a better way. I'm also very sympathetic to Trump's argument that there's really not enough time for him to go through all of the materials. There's apparently 12 million documents in this case. Even on CNN, there was a discussion just the other day between some of their legal correspondents, such as Ellie Honig, and he was saying that he doesn't think that this is necessarily enough time. He said it's up to the defense lawyer to decide what matters to the defense, and I think they're cutting it pretty close to the line here with respect to Donald Trump's constitutional right to fully prepare. So they're kind of, on the prosecution side, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, they have these individuals who want to move through this really quickly, which they, of course, have the constitutional right to do, or the right to do under Georgia law, certainly. And then you have someone who really wants to take their time and go through these documents very carefully and try to make sure that they have this very robust defense prepared. And so they're basically operating with two different cases at this point, which really makes their job a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I think also a complexity here is how many resources this is going to take for the state to process. That could be a reason why the prosecutor, the DA's office, decided to pursue RICO charges. 12 million documents is a lot to process. You're probably going to have to hire additional staff just to process the amount of evidence in this case. I think that's why they were initially considering a date in the spring. October 23rd is so soon. Can a team of 10 attorneys, can a team of 10 attorneys and 10 paralegals process 12 million pages of evidence? I'm sure that a significant portion of the evidence has been redacted because there are security concerns around a lot of this, but the relevant portions of evidence clearly need to be processed and read. So that makes sense to me, that you can't be ready for a trial by the 23rd. What it means for all of this to be on camera is interesting. I think the general public wants to see what goes down in this case in Fulton County, Georgia. I think a lot of people will be glued to court TV watching this, glued to getting updates on what's going on in the trial. But it's also something Donald Trump wanted. So the theatrics that go down in a courtroom with Donald Trump when there are cameras and it's being live streamed, I think it's going to be a spectacle, and there's no way it can't be distracting from the case. I'm not sure how long it's going to last there.
Yeah, I can just imagine how many YouTubers are going to get all kinds of great ad revenue from trying to analyze the case. We saw this in previous cases, in not related to Trump, but in some of the cases with the South Carolina Murdaugh family, for example, that was live streamed, and people have made all kinds of money and views analyzing those cases. There's also a quibble in this case as well about whether or not invoking the right to a speedy trial negates the Georgia law that requires defendants to receive access to all of the evidence against them at least 10 days prior to trial. It also is being called into question by DA Willis whether or not they will now have to call witnesses whose statements were not provided to the state at least 10 days in advance of the trial. And she said that they can also not complain if they receive less than 7 days notice of the trial date. And there's some case law that she cited to back up this assertion that the state doesn't have to provide everything 10 days prior. It's a little bit wishy-washy on whether or not she's citing that case properly, but I think at the very least, based on what I've read, it seems that it's not DA Willis's call as to whether or not that's the case. It's actually the judge who gets to decide whether or not that's a reasonable change to make in the case of invoking a speedy trial. So lots of interesting legal facets involved here that we'll, of course, be following. Meanwhile, Donald Trump may also have a bone to pick with former Fox host Tucker Carlson over an interview that he had with Barstool Sports owner Dave Portnoy. Let's take a look.
Is Biden going to be the nominee? I don't know. I'm not a political person, but I feel like there's been a shift where internally maybe the Democrats don't think he can win, and they're setting the stage to do somebody else. I think it's crazy if he's, I mean, to be honest, I think both Trump and Biden are too old. I think I don't think you should be able to be that old and be president. But I think Trump certainly seems
100%
more aware. I think Biden has got some serious dementia issues. Like how that is the president, I don't know. And that's not a Democrat, because I said about both. It's like Mitch, the guy who had the stroke, doing the speech the other day.
Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, like what? How are these people running our country?
During that conversation, Tucker also agreed that Donald Trump should have participated in the GOP debate. So it sounds like this was a very deep political conversation between Dave Portnoy and Tucker Carlson. I don't know if Tucker's scraping the bottom of the barrel for a guess, but if I know one thing about Dave Portnoy, is he's going to know more about Brianna Chicken Fry dating Zach Bryan than he is about Biden ultimately being the Democratic nominee. Yeah, I'm not sure why Dave Portnoy is the one he's asking in this case. I don't know what's going on with the Tucker Carlson show there, but I think just focusing on Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson's friendship, I think it's interesting to see Tucker Carlson do his own reporting on his own show and not have a clear alliance to supporting a political party or a particular political candidate.
Yeah, and I mean, he never did. Even at Fox, he was pretty unshackled from the typical party line. His show every night was vastly different from everybody else who was on Fox News. He was often very critical of the Republican Party. He had a spat with James Comer at one point. He brought on Kristi Noem after she vetoed that bill that would protect women's sports from men who identify as transgender, and pressed her very, very hard. So I don't think that's necessarily new. I know that him and Dave Portnoy have a friendship going back quite a while. Dave used to be a regular guest on his show on Fox News as well. What does Dave know about politics? I don't know, probably no more than the rest of us. But maybe Tucker's just trying to get maybe like the average Joe's perspective on what's happening leading into the primary. I do think it's interesting that they both agree on the age question. I'm a little bit softer on it just because I don't think age is necessarily an indicator that someone is not cognitively prepared for the rigors of a job. We've seen, 60-year-olds who have much worse awareness, situational awareness than people who are 80 years old. So age is not necessarily a determining factor. So I'm actually more in line probably with Nikki Haley on this, where maybe there should be some kind of cognitive test as opposed to just an age limit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to get the average Joe's perspective, and also someone who's a prominent figure on the right in the United States perspective as to whether or not Donald Trump should be on the debate stage. So much is left up to party leaders when it comes to making decisions about how primaries should go and how primary debates should go. And this rule that you have to promise to ultimately support the nominee, all kinds of rules that go into who can participate, who can even be a candidate running with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, which has its own rules, those rules being governed by party officials. It's deemed party business. It's not regulated by election laws. But to see, the country divided by these terms of, you're either left or you're right, you're Democrat or you're Republican, and how that complicates things when really effectively how our political process works in the United States is, okay, we know Donald Trump is a candidate running on the right in the U.S., whether we like how the political spectrum is divided up or not, that's what it's going to be. So of course he should have been on that debate stage. It just makes common sense, and it shows how much party business gets in the way of the normal democratic process most people would expect, just common sense wise.
Yeah, and I think that's why Tucker's show, both on Twitter and previously on Fox News, was so popular among people, including Democrats. He would mostly have actually more Democrats watching his show than CNN or MSNBC would, particularly in the Target demo, and it's because he just bucked party lines. He wasn't interested in trying to, determine or trying to gather loyalty with any particular political party. It seemed like he was just more interested in calling balls and strikes. We'll be back with more Rising after this.